Hello guys, welcome to my channel Lucid Fanfic, and if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest videos. So be sure to stick around until the end, and let's get started. Izuku had no idea what he had gotten himself into. It seemed like bringing Himiko to his home was a good idea at the time. She was no longer hostile with her thirst for hunger removed, but that didn't change the fact that she was, well, how is a nice way to put this? Not normal. She has childlike curiosity despite Izuku being sure she was older than him. Not much, but she definitely wasn't younger. Izuku has a large amount of curiosity himself, but that is also due to the fact his parents never took him anywhere. The same can probably be said for Himiko, but it's different. She's dainty and carefree, fitting the stereotype of dumb blonde. For someone that is a murderer, she certainly doesn't fit the bill Izuku had thought of for those types of people. But he has noticed that when she walks, it's silent. Izuku hasn't even known her for a full day, and he constantly finds her missing. Then the next second, she pops out of a pile of garbage. "Hey Izuku, could you make a TV?" Himiko asked, current sprawled out on the small kitchen counter Izuku has. Izuku stops what he was doing and looks over to her questioningly. "How would I do that?" Izuku asks. Himiko giggles at him. "With your quirk, silly. You made us clothes before. Surely you can make a TV?" Himiko explained. Izuku hadn't thought of that. Even though, theoretically he could, there was this whole problem of knowing how to make it. Not only that, he'd have to learn how to code, which he did not know. But that didn't mean he didn't have an idea. "No, I'd have to know how to make a TV. But that just gave me an idea," Izuku said. Himiko looked thoughtfully at him as Izuku got up and went over to the kitchen. He opened a cabinet and grabbed out a bowl. With his nails, Izuku made a cut in his other hand and spilled some vital fluid. He put his hand over the bowl and let his vital fluid drip into it. But Izuku had his vital fluid turn into potato chips. Himiko's eyes sparkled as she looked into the bowl. "Wow, you're an infinite food bank," she exclaimed. Izuku chuckled at her excitement. "Not exactly. I still have to harm myself to use this quirk at all, and I don't regenerate my vital fluid. But this quirk will be very useful for the future," Izuku said happily. He raised his hand up and to stop his vital fluid from dripping into the bowl and made the rest of the vital fluid on his hand become a bandage, covering the wound. Izuku and Himiko then shared the potato chips. Izuku spent most of the time showing Himiko around the caravan. She asked a surprising amount of questions and Izuku was kind of concerned with how little she knew. But eventually they had to go to bed. There was only 2 beds. One was on the floor, while the other was connected to the wall. Izuku, being the nice boy, he was volunteered for the floor, which Himiko was fine with. He gave her a blanket and his pillow as he didn't have a spare, but he did have his sleeping bag, so Izuku was still happy. "So Izuku, about me teaching you how to fight. I really don't know how to. I'm more good at avoiding and such. Using my small stature to get around fast and stuff. I've only really been effective at what I do because of my knife," Himiko said. Izuku turned over to her and looked at her. She looked sheepish and sad, which Izuku found strange. "That's fine. When we fought, I presumed your quirk made you faster if you consumed vital fluid. I was convinced you had a speed quirk. So, could you maybe teach me evasion tactics?" Izuku asked. At those words, Izuku watched as Himiko brightened up to match the sun, causing Izuku to blush. What did he say to make her do that? "Of course, I can definitely do that," she said happily. "Night Izuku-an," she said instantly. Izuku stared at her, stunned. She changed in an instant. Izuku then heard light snoring before realizing she was already asleep. How the hell did she do that? Izuku shook his head in disbelief before turning around. She was crazy. Why wasn't he more concerned? Izuku and Himiko both stand to each other in an open area in Dragoba Beach. Himiko was bouncing up and down on her toes with a large smile. Izuku was slightly nervous. He was never really good at exercise or P.E. in school. Running was the only good thing he was really good at, which is how he ended up in this situation, running away from his problems. So the first thing to do while trying to parkour or getting better at evading is getting back up. You'll fail way more than you'll succeed when you start. So learning how to roll is the first step, so follow my lead," Himiko said. She then demonstrated a roll and hopped back up with elegance. Izuku had to be honest. He had no clue what to do, but practice makes perfect, right? Izuku got down and tried to roll, but found some difficulty. He starts to slow down before his feet had hit the ground again. Izuku's feet slammed onto the ground, and he flung himself onto his feet again. Izuku had done it to hard, and ended up stumbling back, which caused Himiko to laugh. "You're a bit clunky there, Izuku," and Himiko said with a giggle. Izuku blushes, but rolls his eyes. "Hey, I have metal bones. Cut me some slack," Izuku whines. Izuku and Himiko then started to practice more on evasion skills. Izuku being the fast learner, he was picked several skills up extremely fast, despite his iron bones. By then, Izuku panted on the ground, while Himiko sat on top of a broken car giggling at him. Izuku turns some of his vital fluid into a water and fills a water bottle and starts to drink it. "Are you that tired, Izuku?" Himiko teases. Izuku groans and nods his head. They had been training for the past 5 hours, and Himiko had maintained her high energy and charisma the entire time. Himiko is a whole new entity that Izuku had to figure out. There had been a question plaguing his mind since he had fixed Himiko's quirk. "Hey, Himiko," Izuku said, catching Himiko's attention. "Yes, Izuku," Himiko asked. Izuku took a deep breath. He didn't want to upset Himiko. They had just met and were getting along well. Izuku didn't want to ruin it by being insensitive to her privacy, but Izuku felt like it was important to know at least a bit about her. So, how long have you been on the streets?" Izuku asked, worried about her reaction. To his surprise, however, she just looked thoughtful. Himiko then looked down at her hands and started counting her fingers. She was mumbling softly to herself as she tried to come up with an answer. "It would be for years." Himiko yelled, too happy. Izuku's eyes widened in shock. "Wait, how old are you?" Izuku asked. 14, I think. "Not sure, but I do know it was the last day of middle school," Himiko said. Izuku was in shock. She has been on the street and probably killing people since she was 10? Izuku knew her thirst was bad, but geez. Was she deprived of it? Probably. She would have been given fake vital fluid to help if she had gone to a quirk counselor. Her parents were probably embarrassed or horrified about her quirk. Probably tried to suppress it and desperately have them not to use it. Izuku's parents probably would have him not reveal that he was quirkless if they had remembered he existed after the diagnosis. "How were you treated?" Izuku asked. Himiko smiled, but Izuku could tell it was forced. She looked down and started kicking the air with her feet. "My parents didn't like my quirk. I wanted vital fluid, but they didn't like that. Always wanting me to be normal and not wanting anyone to know that I had a disgusting quirk that would ruin the family name," she said. "You had a rich family. People whose value is entirely based on quirks," Izuku said. Himiko nodded her head. She then swung her head back and took a huge breath. When she looked back at Izuku, he could see her wide, toothy smile back on her face. "All right, Izuku, your turn," she said happily. Izuku froze. "What?" Izuku said, suddenly becoming very scared. Himiko, picking this up, hopped down from the car and quickly hopped over to Izuku, waving her hands sporadically. No, you don't have to, Izuku. I told you a bit about myself, so I thought it was only fair if you did as well," Himiko said. Izuku started to shake slightly. He nodded his head, understanding her logic. "It would only be fair. I guess it's fair," Izuku stuttered. He hadn't told anyone about his life yet. Not Himaki, not Akito, not anyone. It was something that no one should have dealt with. Izuku is aware that he hasn't had the worst experience from kids. He's bet that other quirkless children have had it worse. But it doesn't mean he's comfortable with telling others, or that his experience throughout his past 9 years were nothing short of a living hell. He has felt like trash the past 9 years of his life. Worthless, useless, pathetic, mistake, Deku. All those times, all of those people. It confuses Izuku of why he didn't just end himself. It would have made his life so much easier. No more pain, no more misery. He wouldn't have to look over his shoulder every second out of fear of having something thrown at him or one of his perpetrators coming to attack. Now look what he's gotten himself into. He's taken people's quirks, and his parents know about it. Izuku. He heard Himiko yelled. Damn it. Maybe he should have found a building to jump of instead of butting his nose into unwanted business. Izuku looked over to Himiko to find her very close. Their noses were almost touching. Izuku then realized that she had her hand touching his cheek softly. Izuku completely froze. His body no longer became responsive to the actions he is trying to make. He had shut down. Izuku, you don't need to tell me anything you're not ready yet. It can wait. You don't need to do anything you don't want to for my sake. If you need to wait, then wait. I'll be ready whenever you are, she said softly. Izuku could only nod his head dumbly. She was too close, and she was touching him. Izuku didn't know what to do. Yeah, thanks hi Himiko, Izuku stuttered, currently in a complete state of shock. Himiko smiled widely. Izuku could feel his face burning again. If you want you can just tell me about your quirk. You like quirks, right? And yours is super cool, Himiko said. Izuku looked down and put on a fake smile. Yeah, I can take and give quirks. Although there is a limit on the quirks I can use at the moment. I currently have 3 unusable quirks, and I have access to 5 at the moment, Izuku said. Himiko nodded, but she had a frown. Izuku looked up at her questioningly. She sighed and looked at Izuku seriously. Something's upset you, Izuku-an. You don't have to do things for my sake, she said, shaking his shoulders slightly. Izuku put his hands on her shoulders to stop Himiko from shaking him. Okay, it's just that I've only had this quirk for almost 2 weeks, Izuku admitted. Himiko looked confused, putting a finger on her chin. What do you mean? She asked. Izuku chuckled awkwardly and rubs the back of his neck, looking away. Well, it's more that I never realized I had it. I was diagnosed quirkless and just didn't know I had this quirk until recently, Izuku said. Himiko's eyes widened. Wait, so you were essentially quirkless? Himiko said. Izuku nodded his head, looking at the ground. He then yelped as Izuku was pulled forward. Izuku then felt arms wrap around him and squeeze him tightly. I'm so sorry, he heard Himiko say. Izuku didn't know what to say. He wasn't all to family what was going on either. Slowly, Izuku moved his arms and wrapped them around Himiko, pulling her closer. Izuku wasn't all too familiar with affection of any kind, but he liked it. Izuku and Himiko continued to practice evasion tactics throughout the week. Izuku had gotten pretty good, but he still wasn't nowhere near as good as Himiko, especially at stealth. But Izuku had noticed he had gained a lot more muscle than what he had before. His iron bones must be helping with that, pulling the extra weight along all of the time. Izuku had also increased his limit for quirks from 5 to 7. So now he can use 2 out of his 3 lock quirks. Energy Spear, Fat Inflammation, and Pitch. Izuku hadn't actually spent too much time worrying those 2 new quirks he received from when he found Himiko. In all honesty, he has been trying to avoid that memory. Thinking about 2 dead bodies and how he is currently living with an ex-murderer isn't something he'd want to worry about. Fat Inflammation was a regeneration quirk. It healed him almost instantly, but he'd have to exchange fat cells to do it. So theoretically, he can stop himself from dying. It will also help with his other quirk Hemomorphy. So that choice was an obvious one. With that and the help of the library, Izuku has made a mini fridge, an electrical generator with solar panels he found in the surrounding junk. Now Izuku was worrying about getting a phone and internet. But Izuku still kind of needed a job. The singer at Hamaki's cafe was still open, but he didn't know how to sing. But maybe he didn't have to. Pitch allowed him to manipulate the sound of his own voice. If he can learn the lyrics of songs, all he'd have to do was sing them and let his quirk do the rest. So he chose that quirk over Energy Spear. Don't get Izuku wrong. He knew it was a strong quirk, but he also had other quirks he can use, so it wasn't a big loss. Izuku also had told Himiko about his old family, keeping out the details of One for All, but telling her that All Might was his father. Saying that she was angry was an understatement. Izuku guessed that kind of reaction. Izuku knew Himiko was also a very touchy and social person who needed to be around others, but after he told her his story, she wouldn't leave him be. Not that Izuku really thought it was a bad thing. He kind of liked having her around. It was nice knowing someone cared. Izuku was currently outside of the caravan, practicing with his constellation quirk. It was a lot more complicated than what Izuku had thought. It works based off of his freckles, so technically if someone had no freckles but had this quirk, would they be quirkless, or would their quirk have developed differently? It was so fascinating. Himiko soon walked out of the caravan, sucking on an ice block. Hey Izuku-an, I've got a question, Himiko said. Izuku turned around and smiled at her. All right, Himi, shoot, he said. Why are you trying to learn how to fight? I mean, you wouldn't be allowed to go to a hero school, Himiko said thoughtfully. Izuku chuckled and nodded his head. Not a legal one, Izuku said. Himiko looked at him confused, telling Izuku he needed to explain it more. Most heroes nowadays want the fame and publicity that comes with it. Most are one-trick ponies and won't try anything that might ruin their reputation. That's not how heroes should be. They should save everyone while putting themselves at risk. Obviously not suicidal, but they shouldn't value their lives above everyone else's. This society has become so quirk-dependent that depending on what type of quirk you have dictates your entire future as a working society member or a nobody. I can't stand for that. I'll be a better hero than my parents and help the people the heroes shove to the side. I'll be vigilante, hope, Izuku monologued. At the end of Izuku's entire speech, Himiko had stars in her eyes. She then ran up to Izuku and started bouncing up and down. Can I come too? I can help you, Himiko said. Izuku blinked. He wanted to refuse, but the logical part of him knew that he shouldn't. She'd be devastated if he said no, and he didn't want to make her upset. Izuku also knew that she would be fine. She was a lot better at fighting than he was. But if she got hurt, Izuku wouldn't be able to forgive himself. But the earnest and shine in her eyes shone right through Izuku's soul. Sighing, Izuku came up with an idea that would hopefully work. All right, but on one condition, Izuku stated. Himiko brightened up, forcing Izuku to look away. Too bright. I'll give you a quirk, Izuku said. This made Himiko stop. She stopped bouncing and looked at Izuku confused. Wait, didn't you say that was dangerous? She said. Well, yes. However, my hemomorphy quirk is similar enough to yours that it should be fine. And if it's not, I can always take it back, Izuku said. At his answer, Himiko smiled and nodded her head excitedly. She stretched her hand out to Izuku. All right, work your magic, Izuku, she said. Izuku laughed and grabbed her hand. He then activated his quirk. He grabbed his hemomorphy quirk and put it inside Himiko. He waited for the bit as he watched Himiko's transform quirk and hemomorphy quirk act with each other. At first, they started to attack each other. It wasn't anything strong, so Izuku let it go for a moment before it stopped. The quirks just laid in Himiko with no issue. Izuku smirked and looked over at Himiko. All right, you have 2 quirks. Let me teach you how to use hemomorphy, Izuku stated. Himiko then smiled widely and jumped into the air. Yay, she squealed. Naomasa sighed as he sat down in the interrogation booth. This last week has been hectic. First was the investigation about Izuku and his painkillers. Then was the meeting with that Dabi person. Naomasa shivered at the memory. He really wasn't comfortable with letting a man like that roam around the streets. He just hopes Eraserhead knows what he is doing. But that's not important right now. Right now, he was interrogating Himaki Gatsu. She has a quirk that used to belong to another person with her original quirk being nowhere found. She was attacked by the person whose quirk she now possesses, so she isn't in trouble. All she has to do is tell Naomasa who the person was that gave her a quirk. But she was being incredibly difficult. Miss Gatsu, I don't think you understand the situation right now. You have to tell me who gave you that quirk, Naomasa said exasperatedly, getting very frustrated by the girl. Himaki glared at Naomasa in response. And I told you, over my dead body. Why the hell do you think I would tell you that? Himaki asked. Because they are breaking the law, Naomasa answered. Himaki scoffed and leaned forward over the table, getting closer to Naomasa. All right, I want you to listen to me. My entire life, I have told that I was a mistake. That I was worthless and had no future because of my trash quirk. I was told that by my peers, parents, and even heroes. But this kid was the first person to respect me as a human being. Despite my quirk, he treated me with respect. They then helped me, the first person to have ever helped me my entire life. They are more of a hero than what any hero could ever be. You wouldn't understand as your quirk practically landed you this job. So if you think I'm going to sell out the one person who has ever respected me to people who have only treated me like trash, you're delusional. The girl laughed angrily. Naomasa frowned. They're probably using you, Naomasa countered. Himaki shrugged and gave Naomasa a tired look. I know they aren't idiot, but even if they were, I wouldn't care. I would rather be a pawn to them than be a punching bag for the people with heroic quirks. Now if you have nothing more to say, I want to go home, Himaki said sternly. Naomasa groaned and covered his face with his hand. He had to find All for One's successor fast. He knows that whoever he is isn't planning anything good. He is going to brainwash the people who have nothing left and need any form of love or appreciation of any kind. They are the easiest targets, and Naomasa needs to stop them. Izuku and Himiko stood outside their caravan. It was home at this point. Izuku at least thought it was home. He didn't know too much about Himiko, but how she acts, Izuku guessed she called it home too. Izuku had gotten Himiko to practice with hemomorphy for the past 2 days, which Himiko complained was unnecessary. The logical side of Izuku knew he was being unreasonable. Himiko was just going to create knives with her quirk anyway. But he didn't want her getting hurt or hurting herself to give herself more vital fluid for power. Despite her protest, Izuku had to make sure she had the basics of the quirks down. He had taken the quirk back momentarily so he can make each of them a costume. He made himself his, which was a black and white hoodie with the word hope in bold over his chest in a dark green color. He gave himself matching pants and made himself a mask. When he said make, he already had one prepared. He had found an old mask that looked like a metal hockey mask with an evil toothy grin. Izuku liked it and adjusted to not make it look as old. He was also going to make Himiko's costume, but she insisted that she could do it. Izuku, despite trying to tell her she needed to know what material to use and how to make it. Himiko pouted and crossed her arms at him, however. Izuku sighed and relented at her immediately. Definitely a weakness he's have to fix in the future. As Izuku expected, Himiko failed miserably while making her costume. But she insisted that she just needed a second go. Izuku, sighing at her cute antics, and kept her have a second go, only for her to go above and beyond his expectations. Himiko's costume was black and deep red. She wore black leather over her entire body and only a small mask. Izuku felt his nose starting to bleed at how tight her clothes were. He quickly took back the quirk and made her a costume. Himiko was sad about it, but took it nonetheless. It was still similar to what she had before, only a red covering over her nose and mouth, red pants, and a sleeveless hood with a small red tie. Despite Himiko loving it, she still wanted to wear the costume she made. Izuku quickly denied her, though, saying it wasn't warm enough for night and didn't do good enough at hiding her identity. It's totally not, because he got a weird feeling when she wore the second one. It hadn't confused Izuku at all. He was just disappointed with what she made. Yep, definitely no other emotion. Yay, so are we ready to go? Himiko said happily, flipping 3 knives in a single hand. Izuku looked at them nervously, just waiting for Himiko to accidentally cut herself. No, we still need to give you a name, Izuku said. Himiko looked over to Izuku thoughtfully, which scared the hell out of Izuku as she continued to juggle the 3 knives with one hand while not looking. Togo is fine, Izuku chuckled nervously, glancing at Himiko's eyes to her knife. No, that won't work. You are still classified as a murderer, so you need a different name, Izuku said. Himiko looked down at the mention of her as a murderer, but Izuku sprung forward and quickly snatched her knives. Himiko looked back at him with wide eyes and pouted. Hey, she whined. Izuku smiled sheepishly at her and rubbed the back of his head. Sorry, but you were scaring me with your juggling. But your name could be Carmilla, Izuku said. Himiko's blank look to Izuku. He had to elaborate. Well, Carmilla is the most famous female vampires in legends and was still incredibly powerful, even being acknowledged by Dracula, Izuku said. Himiko seemed to brighten at those words and ran forward and hugged him. I love it, Izuku-an. It matches us perfectly. I'm Carmilla and you're Dracula. Himiko beamed up at him. Izuku could feel his face grow hot at their proximity, but nod with a shaky smile. Izuku didn't have the heart to tell her that he just very heavily elaborated Carmilla, but it's probably for the best. Izuku and Himiko had finally gone out to the city. Izuku hadn't made a route for them yet. He had to look around the city to gauge good areas to scout out and be on the lookout for. Izuku had also had the thought of having him and Himiko split up, but a gut instinct told him it wouldn't be a good idea to let an ex-murderer run around with a knife. Don't get him wrong, he trusted Himiko. But that doesn't change the fact she still isn't mentally stable. Much like himself. Izuku and Himiko had gone to running across the rooftops, and Izuku had quickly found out that Himiko was insanely fast. He already knew Himiko was quick. He had thought she had a speed quirk. But as they were jumping from roof to roof, he was struggling to keep up. Izuku didn't exactly have an excuse for himself either. Despite having his bones being iron, which obviously made Izuku incredibly heavy for his size, Izuku no longer had much issue with his quirk anymore. He had increased the power in his leg joints by creating stronger joints in them with his quirk to make him move faster, allowing him more agility and turn at the flip of the dime. But he still didn't hold a candle to Himiko. She was doing tricks, flipping through the air and landing on the other roof with a handstand. The only reason Izuku hadn't lost her yet was because of his quirk bolt. Somehow, Himiko was oblivious to how much dust Izuku was eating from her. She did only have that transformation quirk, didn't she? Izuku smiled at that fact. If she were to have not been ostracized and got the help she needed, perhaps she'd have become a hero. Probably an underground one because her quirk would be best suited for it. But when she needed to fight, Izuku chuckles to himself as whoever they were tried to scramble away as Himiko suddenly appeared behind them. He then stopped. Himiko did too. Izuku swears he heard a scream, and judging by how Himiko is also on alert and looking around, she did as well. However, nothing seemed to be going on. The night was dark and peaceful, only the lack of breeze making the night feel kind of warm. Izuku turned to Himiko and opened his mouth to speak, but a scream stopped him. "Let's go," Izuku said, his expression hard and serious as he turned into an electric bolt and zoomed away. Himiko had also become serious as she chased after him. The scream had been quite loud, although if Izuku and Himiko weren't adept from listening to small sounds, they wouldn't have heard it from that far away. Izuku crashed into the side of a roof, but quickly recovered. He felt his bones bend at the sheer force of the impact, but Izuku quickly sets his bones back into place. That bone manipulation quirk had been a blessing as he had quiet weak ribs from the fact that they had been broken several times. Izuku pushes himself up and continues to run across the rooftops. "Better keep your mouth shut, or I'll punch you to the moon," he heard a voice say. Izuku scowled at the words, but kept quiet. He looked down the alley where it was taking place. There were 4 people in there. 3 were male, and 1 was female. 1 male was on the ground, and another man held the woman an arm around her neck. He couldn't identify a quirk from any of those 3, but he could from the last male. Izuku wasn't sure if it was a mutant or part of his quirk, but the man was surrounded with something. Izuku wasn't sure what it was, but it seemed to cover the man like an aura, but it had a clear gleam to the faint light on the street, meaning it was reflective and most likely a solid. Maybe metal like mercury? Izuku also noticed the man holding the woman was significantly shorty and not very well built in muscle. He was super lean and bony. The girl was a lot bigger than him and could probably take him on easily. Except he was the one who said they'd punch them to the moon. Looking at the alleyway, Izuku did notice a large garbage bin dented inwards and now unusable across the alleyway. So he had some sort of strength quirk. But what was the other guy's quirk? The man with the strength quirk had obviously not taken out the man who was unconscious, as he wasn't that injured nor near broken like the bin. It could be that his quirk doesn't work on people, but that still means either the girl or the other man took them out. Izuku's eyes snapped to the side as he feels another presence. He sighs in relief when he saw it was only Himiko. He then turned his attention back to what was happening. The shorter male was touching the girl inappropriately, and Izuku could feel himself bile with disgust. Himiko take out that the guy holding the girl. He probably has a strength quirk. When that's done, come help me. Not sure what the other guy can do, Izuku said. Himiko nodded her head, and Izuku couldn't help but smile. They were going to fight crime together, not as heroes, but they were better than them anyway, so it doesn't matter. Izuku and Himiko was going to make a difference as they jumped down into the alleyway. Izuku had planned to jump down onto the man's head, but whatever was floating around the man was hard. Izuku's foot slammed into it, and Izuku winced at the force. The man noticed this attack and immediately jumped back. Whatever was floating around him became sharp and pointed at Izuku threateningly. Izuku was about to charge with his bolt quirk, but a sudden yell behind him made him stop. The man saw what happened behind Izuku and used whatever around him to create a wall. Izuku then quickly scaled the building, making claws on his hands and feet, and pulling himself up the wall with ease. Izuku jumped over the wall and saw the man getting onto a motorbike. Izuku summoned a tentacle and sent it forward, but was immediately stopped by an immense amount of pain on his lower back. Izuku quickly doubled over onto his knees. He watched whatever the man's quirk was to create the wall surround him again before he took off on his motorbike. Izuku could feel something cold running down his back. It was definitely blood. He couldn't let whoever that man was get away. Izuku used fat inflammation to heal whatever wound he had on his back before concentrating hard on the motorbike. Izuku could catch up to him with Bolt, but whatever quirk the man had was dangerous up close. So he focused his tentacle quirk on the man's bike. He could summon tentacles on any surface, but it was incredibly stressful to do so. He felt the purple patches of his skin tighten. A tentacle was summoned on the man's bike. The man panicked, and before he could act, Izuku knocked him off of his bike, causing the man to skid across the ground. Izuku waited for him to get up, but he made no movement to. Whatever was floating around his body, absorbing back into his body. Izuku stretched out a tentacle from his body and pulled the unconscious man over to him. While doing that, Izuku looked behind him. Himiko was trying to calm down the woman while the man who was assaulting her was sticking out of a rubbish bin. Izuku couldn't help but laugh at that. Who are you two? She asked, still somewhat scared. Izuku doesn't blame her. They most certainly don't look like heroes, and she was just assaulted moments ago. It's okay, we are just here to help. Now what happened here? Izuku asked. The girl sighed and she looked behind her, looking at the man in the bin. That's my ex-boyfriend. He's a control freak who doesn't like being told no. That's why I dumped him. Looks like he finally found me again, the woman said, glaring at the man. Izuku nodded his head understandingly. The woman groaned and looked up to the sky. It's just so frustrating. His father is part of the police, so he gets away with almost everything. Not to mention with his stupid quirk, he believes he's on top of the world. The girl complains. Izuku frowns. Izuku hates this type of behavior from anyone. People who have authority as well as a child with a powerful quirk are basically untouchable. It makes Izuku sick. His sister and her friends got away with everything while doing it to him. Just because he doesn't have a quirk and they have heroic parents. Izuku can relate. Alright, who's this though? Himiko asked, pointing over to the man Izuku had in his tentacle. The girl in response shrugged. The dude doesn't really have actual friends. He probably just paid him to act as a bodyguard, she responded. Izuku nodded his head. He took the man who was the victim's ex-boyfriend's quirk and left the other guy with his. He probably didn't deserve to have it taken. Himiko and Izuku were about to leave and let the girl call the police when she suddenly yelled for them. Wait, what's your names? She asked. Himiko and Izuku turned to each other. Himiko quickly leaned over to Izuku and whispered something to him. What's my name again? She asked. Izuku gave her a deadpan stare before putting his hand onto his face. He sighed before looking over to the girl. I'm Hope, and this is Carmilla. We're here to help the people that the heroes refuse to save, Izuku said, before turning into an electric bolt and flying off. The woman in the alley watched as Carmilla started to doing flips on the walls until she reached the roof and sped off without a sound. Whoa, was all she had to say. Aizawa was tired. He's always tired, but right now, he's tired of being outside of his apartment. The Izuku Yagi case was already a thorn in his side, but now the new vigilante duo is going to give him even more problems though. Eraserhead doesn't care about vigilantes. These two aren't dangerous or employ a lot of force to take down offenders, so he isn't really bothered by them. However, Naomasa is a different story, purely because of the fact that they both seem to have multiple quirks. Naomasa is convinced that one of them is all for one's successor. Aizawa does agree, but in a slightly different way than Naomasa. Naomasa says that their partner has multiple quirks, but from what Aizawa has been able to gather from both the victims and attackers that the one called Carmilla uses her vital fluid to create items. She probably has the ability to create any item as long as she knows how it's made, which explains how she created fire and acid. Aizawa has also determined their names and genders. Carmilla is a girl while Hope is a boy. Yes, boy and girl, both are young. Extremely young. Maybe high school juniors at the oldest, but Aizawa thinks that might not be the case. Well, at least not with one of them. Naomasa wants him on the case as Aizawa is one of the few that knows about All for One. He'd be doing it with all might, endeavor, and Sernaitai. With helping, Aizawa is sure they can definitely find this vigilante duo, but he needs to find them first. This vigilante has been giving quirks to other people and taking them from villains and thugs. But it seems like he doesn't take them from everyone. The people who he has given quirks to say he is a savior and will protect the outcasts like them. Naomasa and All Might are convinced that this is all a scheme to amass a cult following like the original All for One. But it doesn't make sense. Why would he have an accomplice with him? Why help people and not give them quirks, and why not steal the quirks from all of the villains? Wouldn't it be smarter to bribe the villains, those who already are against the law, than those who aren't? Frankly, it doesn't make sense unless they want to be a true hero. Aizawa has noticed a pattern, well, not a pattern, things that Hope has done with his quirk. He likes to steal the strong quirks, not from everyone, but from people who have authoritative parents like police, hero commission, or straight-out heroes. They seem to be egotistical and very narcissistic to everyone around them. Aizawa knows how people act, especially with kids. He is a teacher after all. Ignore the fact he has already expelled his first years this year. So this person probably has experienced such things from other people from their quirk. But they'd still have the determination and willpower to pull it off for good purposes instead of becoming in butthole with their new power. Izuku Yagi fits that bill. He may be incorrect, overthinking this entire thing. But if he is right, then Izuku has all for one. But now the question is, how did he get it? Izuku was going to his job in his friend's cafe. His quirk pitch really helps with singing, and it's kind of a breeze to do so. Himiko's following him as they arrive in. They got there about 15 minutes, so Izuku had time to prepare. They've been a vigilante duo for slightly more than a week now, which has been awesome. Izuku has increased his quirk limit to 10 and has given so many people quirks. They've all looked so happy having a quirk that'll make them normal like everyone else. Izuku also has received 5 new quirks from it as well. 2 of them aren't that special. He has a quirk called Horns that gives him red horns on his head. He can extend them and make them sharp, but it causes pain to his skull. Izuku hasn't used it as it really has no usefulness unless he needs to stab someone who is on top of him. The next one is Retardant that blocks electrical attacks from his hands. It is useful because of his heavy skeleton quirk makes him susceptible to electric quirks, but other than that, it's got nothing. But his next 3 quirks are awesome though. The first one was a simple strength enhancement quirk, but he could combine that with a quirk he already had, Strong Impact. Strong Impact was a weird quirk. Izuku could increase his punches and kicks to devastating power, but he had a limit on how many times he can do it. It started with twice a day, but now Izuku can do it 8. He wants so he'll have to train that quirk a bit more. The strength enhancement quirk was definitely helping. The next one was Missile Teeth. Izuku could fire his teeth out like missiles and cause a surprisingly powerful explosion. Mainly a shrapnel cutting skin, but it is still effective. The reason he has this quirk is because the guy who had it couldn't use it. Once they fired their teeth, they wouldn't grow back. But thanks to Izuku's quirk, he could, and since his teeth were metal, they hurt a lot more. Unfortunately, he had run out of space. Izuku wishes he could trade in one of his other quirks for it, but for now he'll have to wait. His next quirk has the same problem. It's awesome, but unfortunately Izuku has run out of space. It's called Adapt, which means if Izuku takes damage from something, say fire, he will become increasingly resistant to it. The quirk is quite specific, but it would still be a strong quirk. It was unfortunate, it ended up in the hands of a murderer. Izuku walked into the cafe and immediately spotted his friend Akito. He was sitting next to his older sister Nomi, who unlike him with black skin, she had pure black hair and eyes. She is a part of a villain rehabilitation program, since she has used her quirk to go invisible in dark areas to steal things. Izuku has only met her a couple of times, but knows she's nice, just defensive of her little brother. Izuku hasn't told her about his quirk. The only people who know are Himaki, Akito, and Himiko. Since Izuku's appearance likes to change with what quirks he receives, Izuku has had to find a lie to explain. It was hard as one day, he could have horns, and the next day they could be gone. But Izuku was able to land on one. Mutation. He can gain a random attribute to his body. They can appear or disappear whenever with no pattern. She seems to take that explanation, as well as curious children on the street. Izuku walked over to them with Himiko in tow. They sat down with the 2 shadow twins, smiling at their arrival. Hey guys, you ready for your gig, Izuku? Nomi asked. Izuku smiled brightly. Yeah, I am. How have you been with the whole villain program? Izuku asked. Nomi sighed, brushing the hair out her face. Yesterday was trash. The person in charge of that day is sexist as hell. The only reason it was bearable was one of the volunteers, Nomi answered. Why? Are they cute? Himiko asked, trying to tease her. Nomi scoffs with a smirk and leans back in her chair. Izuku has heard a bit about the volunteers. She has to go to 2 different locations for her villain rehabilitation, and depending on the location or the day, the volunteer is different. Except, Izuku has only heard bad things about the volunteers from her. Wait, I thought you didn't like any of them? Izuku questions, which Nomi responds with a shrug. No, I like one, the other 4 are awful though. Thank God the one I like was there though. Our supervisor was being a real, but, Nomi said. What did they do? Akito asked. Oh, he yelled at them. Basically calling them a sexist pig, and why are you here to help them if you aren't even going to bother to do your job? He's reporting that douche, so hopefully we don't have to worry about him again, Nomi said with a satisfied smirk. So I'll restate it. Are they cute? Himiko said. Nomi face-palmed and looked at Himiko with a dead look. I'm gay, Himi, so I don't care, Nomi said. Himiko blinked at her before laughing nervously, then started cuddling up to Izuku. Izuku blushed, but let her do so. Nomi and Akito smirked at the two as they watched Izuku pat Himiko's head. What about you two? You both seem too close to be just friends, Akito says, smugly looking at the two. Izuku freezes, his face suddenly sparking red. Himiko shrugs and smiles wider as she squeezes Izuku closer. Izuku then starts to think, are him and Himiko more than friends? Well, they do live together and fight crime together, which is more than just regular friends. But as partners, Izuku never really has thought much about it, as everyone has always either mocked him or ignored him. But Himiko has always been attached to him by the hip, never leaving his side. Maybe they are more than friends. Wait guys, I want to grab a milkshake, Izuku hears a voice says. A voice that is familiar. Nomi obviously recognizes, as well as she turns her head around to look at them. Izuku tenses. He becomes unmoving as a wave of paranoia and fear. Izumi had just walked into the cafe. Her blonde hair and shining blue eyes walk into the store with a happy smile. Izuku shudders at the memory of her face, the sinister and evil smile she barred at him multiple times while hitting him with a chair or a block of ice. Himiko, sensing his distress, looks up and notices what Izuku was looking at. A girl with straight, shiny blonde hair with a nice shirt and skirt walked into the store. Himiko pouted before she felt Izuku shake slightly. Looking at Izuku, Himiko remembered what caught her attention. Izuku was scared. Himiko has known Izuku for a while now, and she knows he isn't a scaredy cat. Izuku is anxious and cautious, but he isn't scared. Brave and courageous in all situations. So Izuku being scared of just looking at a person doesn't make sense. Unless it's one of the 5 people Izuku has mentioned to her. Now Himiko doesn't know their names. Izuku calls them by childish nicknames and purposefully hasn't elaborated on their actual names, probably knowing that she would go after them. She knows that she can't do that, but it doesn't make her any happier. But which one is this? Himiko knows that there is 3 girls and 2 guys, with one of them being his sister. Izuku then watches as another 4 people walk into the store. He recognizes all of them. Katsuki, Shoto, Katsumi, and Zayato all walk in. Katsumi has the same sneer and bored look on her face, her hands shoved into her pants pockets and walking with a hunch, yet keeping her head high to try and look down on anyone. Shoto has his same neutral look on his face as he looks reluctant to really do anything for others. Zayato is next to him, trying to hide behind any kind of spotlight, yet observing everyone else with a slight glare. The Katsuki who doesn't look angry, frustrated, or annoyed. He doesn't have his signature hunch as he stomps to any location where he sees to be his personal playground. He seems oddly calm, an expression Izuku has only seen a few times. It becomes even clearer when their eyes meet. Katsuki seems to be look over him. Izuku thinks he would sneer or laugh at his appearance. He does look strange with all of his quirks. But instead he sees something that Izuku hasn't seen since they were kids. A small smile. One that wasn't full of malice, pride, or degrading of others. It was genuine, one that Izuku only his glimpses of before they got their quirks. Katsuki quickly turned away, and he no longer had that smile. But Izuku couldn't get that thought out of his head. That isn't the same Katsuki he remembers. What happened? The group walked to the counter, and Izumi bought a milkshake, but Katsuki lingered behind the group. He was glancing at Izuku's table every once in a bit. The group then started to leave, but Katsuki didn't go with them. Katsumi turned around and gave him a glare, which Katsuki returned. You coming? She asked, her rude attitude seeping into her voice. Katsuki rolled his eyes and put his hands in his pocket. I'll catch up. I've got something to do, he said, turning around to the table where Izuku sat. Katsumi and the rest of the group all turned to the table. Nomi smiled at them and gave them a wave. Katsumi scoffed and turned around. You're not fluking on us again. You better catch up in 10 minutes, otherwise I'll beat you, she said. Sure you will, was all Katsuki said before he started walking over to the table. Nomi smirked and turned to them. Speak of the devil. Those are the 5 volunteers, and this is the only good one, Nomi said. She scooted over on the chair. Katsuki then sat down in it. Izuku was tensed. He was as stiff as a rock. He was trying to calm himself. Katsuki was acting different. way different than his usual hot-tempered attitude from how he had been before. Himiko, meanwhile, was glaring at Katsuki, who for some reason didn't seem to mind. Hey, this is Bakugo. He comes to the villain rehabilitation program to help out. Bakugo, these are my friends, Nomi said. Bakugo flipped his head up. Sup, Bakugo said. Akito smiled and waved his hand. Hey, I'm her younger brother, Akito said. Izuku then realized it was his turn. He couldn't come up with a fake name. Nomi was right there, and he's not sure if she'll question it or not. She knows that Izuku and Himiko are runaways, who currently lives in a junkyard. But it wouldn't make sense that they were willing to tell her that, but not Bakugo. Izuku smiled nervously as he realized his fate was sealed. I'm Izuku. Nice to meet you, Izuku said. Himiko was about to answer, but she yelped when Akito kicked her leg. He saw what her face looked like and kicked her to try and get rid of her hatred-filled expression. Himiko growled at him before forcing a smile and purposefully baring her fangs. Toga, she said with forced happiness. Bakugo nodded his head, his eyes lasting on Izuku for a little too long. Izuku was scared that he would recognize him. He knew it was outlandish for him to do so. He now had several additions to his appearance that a quirkless person like him wouldn't have. White hair, red horns, purple patches of skin, metal teeth. It would be crazy for Katsuki to know who he was. The only way he could know that if he was actively searching for him, which would be ridiculous. He wouldn't know anything about All for One, so there is no way he would know, right? Luckily for Izuku, he caught something at the corner of his eye. Looking over, he saw Himaki waving him over, telling him that he needed to go. Izuku sighed in relief as he quickly stood up. Sorry, looks like I'm starting, Izuku said. Himiko's smile changed from forced to genuine as she waved at Izuku. Good luck, Izuku-an, she said happily, making Izuku smile. Izuku waved and left for his singing gig. Katsuki took this opportunity to leave, knowing the rest of his gang wouldn't be happy if he just ditched. Izuku's job eventually ended though, and him and Himiko had said goodbye to their friends and left. But the atmosphere as they walked was tensed. Izuku was still reminiscing on Katsuki. He seemed so docile compared to the violent and brash boy he had grown up with. He was different, still rude and loud, but no longer so up front and angry as before. If it wasn't for Himiko huffing as she walked, Izuku may have gone into a muttering storm. Those were the people who hurt you, weren't they? Himiko said, looking over at Izuku. Izuku flinched at the accusation before sighing in defeat. Himiko looked stern, an expression he's never seen on her before. Izuku reluctantly nodded his head. He was scared at what was going through her head. No matter what it was never good. I'm going to kill those buttholes, she said. Izuku quickly started flailing his hands everywhere. What, no Himi, you can't do that, Izuku said, but then he stopped. Himiko still looked stern as she looked up to him, but tears were at the edges of her eyes, threatening to spill. No, they hurt you, not just a little. They got away with everything because of their parents and powerful quirks, and are going to become heroes. If they aren't stopped, they'll never stop. If they are willing to do all of those things to someone who they once saw as a friend, what do you think they'll do to a stranger? Himiko yelled. She had gripped Izuku's shirt tightly as she held onto him. Izuku could only stare in shock as he looked Himiko's in the eyes. She looked distraught and desperate as a few tears had fallen from her. Izuku didn't know what to say. Izuku started working the gears in his head for an answer to give her when another voice spoke up. I agree with that, a raspy voice said. Izuku's head flipped around. Himiko looked at who had spoken and immediately became defensive. The person who had just spoken to them had a smug smile. He was leaning against the wall of an alleyway with his arms crossed over his chest. The man had icy turquoise eyes and shaggy black hair. He had a large leather black jacket and a few silver decorations. He had large combat boots, and the man had several piercings. But the most concerning part about him was he had staples on his face that held the flaky parts of his skin to the burned patches of it. Izuku got into a fighting stance, and Himiko got in one too. She had her hand in her pocket ready to grab a knife. The man laughed at their actions and pushed himself off the wall. The man put his hands in his pockets as he smiled at the two. You know, I've had trouble finding you. This whole time I've been trying to find a quirkless bush head. But look at you now, the man said. Izuku suddenly became scared. How did this stranger know who he was? His parents, who were top pro heroes looking for him, who now had All for One, couldn't find him. But this random thug could? Himiko growled and moved in front of Izuku. She pulled out her knife and was ready to attack. "Who are you?" she asked angrily and threateningly. She was ready to strike as soon as the man made a move. The man smirked and raised his hands as a mock surrender. "Carmilla or Toga? Which do you prefer? Are you going to kill me to keep me silent?" the man asked. Himiko growled, but Izuku quickly put a hand on her shoulder and pulled her back. "Calm yourself. He's just trying to antagonize you," Izuku said, looking at the man. The man hummed and put his hands back in his pockets. "Guess I can't call you Bushhead anymore, huh?" the man said. Izuku paused as he looked at the man. "Huh," Izuku said. "Can't call him Bushhead anymore? There's only one person who ever called him Bushhead, and unfortunately, he's dead." The man smirked wider, causing the staples on his face to stretch. The man then outstretched his arm, and Izuku watched as he ignited a brilliant blue flame. Izuku wasn't dumb. Fire quirks are quite common, but they all are pretty similar. The main difference being where the person can activate the quirk. Endeavor's quirk is an anomaly in his unnaturally hot fire, and the only people who can match his heat are people who can charge their flames before producing them. Only one person has ever had a fire quirk hotter than Endeavor's. But he was dead, wasn't he? "Hey Izuku, it's me," the man said, his smirk turning soft as he extinguished his flames. Izuku gasped at the man. "Tuya. That man was Tuya." Tuya was the one person after his diagnosis who protected him, who saw what was going on and didn't care that he was quirkless and wanted to help him. He was alive. "Tuya?" Izuku said shakily as he took a few steps towards him. Tuya smiled, outstretching his arms to Izuku. Izuku cracked out a sob and ran to Tuya and hugged him. Tuya laughed as he grabbed Izuku and embraced him. "Sorry I left, kid," Tuya said as he bent down and hugged Izuku tighter. Izuku cried softly into his shoulder as he returned the hug. Himiko was in the corner, slightly confused but accepted whatever was happening. She put her knife away and watched whatever was happening in front of her. Izuku sobbed as he gripped Tuya as much as he could. "I thought you," Izuku shuddered. He felt Tuya nod and rub the back of his head soothingly, trying to keep him calm. "I did, well tried. I didn't succeed, but I couldn't face what I had just done. So I ran. I was too scared to come back to even see my father, so I didn't. I'm sorry I left you alone. I had hoped they would change, but knew they wouldn't." "I'm so sorry," Tuya said, his voice becoming strained. Izuku choked and hugged Tuya tighter. They stayed in a death grip with each other for. Eventually, the two backed off with each other, and Tuya straightened up. He laughed and walked over to Himiko and pulled her in. He kept one arm around Izuku's shoulder and put his other around Himiko. He bent down and pulled them together. "You two have been getting up to a lot of things lately," Tuya said with a devilish smirk. Himiko looks at him confused. "Excuse me, but how do you know me and Izuku?" Himiko asked. Tuya laughed and shook his head. "My biological name is Tuya Todoroki, the eldest son of Endeavor and Ice Queen," Tuya said. Himiko gasped. She didn't know what the names of the two kids who tortured Izuku, but she did remember Izuku saying that they had Endeavor and Ice Queen as parents. "I know, shocker. Anyway, I go by Dabi now. You still call me Tu-chan if you want, Izuku," Tuya said, winking at Izuku. Izuku basically gleamed in happiness and smiled widely. Himiko looked away at the sheer brightness of his smile. Tuya, or Dabi, was more interested in his shiny metal teeth. He didn't know they were there. "Anyway, how I know is simple. I'm an underground informant. I'm powerful. I exchange protection for money or information, and sometimes attack a few abusers and rob them. I found out that you hung out with a guy that had multiple weird features and managed to connect them to the rumored kid with multiple quirks. Now, at first I was skeptical about it, as the only person who has the quirk is a guy named All-for-One, I think," Dabi says, looking over to Izuku as confirmation. Izuku nodded and Dabi continued. "But when people started missing their quirks, I knew it was no joke. That they became a vigilante, which wouldn't make sense if they were evil. After doing a bit of looking around and small bits of stalking, I found you too. Even with all your new thing, I can still see the same old bush head from all those years ago," Dabi said with a grin. Izuku laughed, but then a thought came to mind. "Wait, how do you know about All-for-One?" Izuku asked. Dabi sighed and removed the hand around Himiko. He looked down at the ground. Dabi then looked up at Izuku with his now free hand pointing at him. "You know who your parents are, right?" Dabi asked. Izuku nodded. "All Might and Green Tornado," Izuku said. Dabi nodded his head and looked away. Thought so, you always were smart. Anyway, yes, so how I know is from my father. He originally had a relationship with my mother just to have a strong child, which was me to overpass All Might. But then Endeavor found put about one for all on all his digging to see if All Might had any weaknesses, and I wad kinda there. So yeah, look, I really wanted to tell you, I really did. But I was worried I'd hurt you even more. All I was your entire world, and me telling you he was your dad wouldn't have helped. I'm sorry, Dabi said. Izuku nodded and gave Dabi another hug. It's okay. You did everything you could for me too, Chan, Izuku said. Dabi nodded, then looked over to Himiko, who was apprehensive. He leaned over to her and whispered, "Take care of him for me," Dabi asked. Himiko smiled widely and nodded her head vigorously, flashing Dabi a thumbs up. Dabi smirked and then bopped Izuku on the head. Izuku yelped and quickly recoiled and rubbed his head. Dabi rolled his eyes and ruffled Izuku's hair. "Well, looks like I've got to head off now," Dabi said. Izuku immediately saddened at the prospect of Dabi leaving so soon. "Wait, why?" Izuku asked. Dabi huffed and smiled, although it was kind of sheepishly. He put his hand up to the back of his head and started rubbing it. "Well, the police found out that you had powerful painkillers and deduced that I was the only person who could have given them to you," Dabi said. Izuku's eyes widened. "Wait, you were the one who gave me all the medical supplies." Dabi grinned and gave Izuku finger guns. "Yep. You ran off, and I knew more thing would happen to you after that, so I went to your house and gave you some supplies. The painkillers I gave you were strong, but I had a feeling you'd need them," Dabi said. "Wait, are you being arrested?" Himiko piped up, asking Dabi a question. Izuku paled at that prospect, but that quickly washed over as Dabi shook his head no and put his hands in his pockets as he turned over to Himiko. "They'll certainly try, but as long as I know All Might's secret identity, they can't lay a finger on me. That information is too powerful to not be used," Dabi said with an evil smirk, one that Himiko matched, which concerned Izuku a little. More than a little. But then a thought sprung into Izuku's mind. If Dabi pulls that card to get out of jail, then All Might would be after him. He'd use Dabi to try and lure him out, or just straight up finish him to try and hold the secret. Even with Dabi's incredibly powerful quirk, All Might could still kill him quicker than how Dabi could defeat All Might. Izuku couldn't just let something like that happen, but he can't keep tabs on Dabi 24/7. Unless he gives him something. It is unfortunate, yes. It is a strong quirk that would have been really useful for Izuku in the long run, but Dabi needs it more. Not only will it help with his quirk, but it could save him against All Might or any other person trying to unalive him. "Wait, Dabi, before you go," Izuku said, quickly running up to Dabi. Dabi turned around and looked at Izuku with a raised eyebrow. "Yes, no, Cone, what is it?" Dabi asked. Izuku frowned at the nickname, which made Dabi smile wider. He rolled his eyes and continued with what he was going to say. "Well, you know about All for One, right? How I can steal and give quirks." Izuku said. Dabi nodded. "You want to give me a quirk?" Dabi said. "Exactly," Izuku said with a large smile. Dabi huffed, but smiled nonetheless. He reached out his hand for Izuku, who then grabbed it. Izuku focused on his quirk. He grabbed Adapt. It felt intelligent, susceptible to change, survivable, and knowing. A quirk that could do a lot of things. He then pushed it into Dabi. While Izuku was there, he thought he may as well check out Dabi's quirk. On the outside it felt hot, elegant, and angry at the same time. Despite how common they were, this was the first time Izuku had come into contact with one, so the feeling was kind of overwhelming. It may have just been Dabi's quirk though, as it was way too powerful for his own body. Izuku decided to dive deeper into the quirk, but instead of finding complexities, he found cold. It was freezing, no warmth or light anywhere. Izuku didn't understand what was going on. He tried going deeper, but the cold was just too much, and it forced Izuku out. Dabi groaned as he felt the unnatural force enter his body. Dabi then leaned against the wall as he tried balancing himself. Izuku was panting as he looked at his hands. He hasn't had All for One for that long, but he has traded and gifted quirks several times. Why was this time so different, and why did it hurt going into Dabi's quirk? "Ugh, so what quirk did you give me, kid?" Dabi asked. Izuku tried recovering himself, but it wasn't working. He used fat inflammation, and instantly whatever sensation of pain he was feeling was gone. Ignoring it for now, Izuku quickly got up and went over to Dabi. "It's called Adapt. If you're hurt by something, you'll gain a resistance to it, like fire or cutting. But before you head off, I need to check if the quirk is suitable for your body," Izuku said. He knows most people can't handle two quirks. Some people can't even handle combination quirks. But with how powerful Dabi's quirk was, Izuku thought he'd be able to handle a completely different quirk. After placing his hand in Dabi's chest, Izuku was glad to find that Dabi was fine. However, what was happening was weird. It seemed like Dabi's quirk was attacking the other quirk. It seemed to have injured it, but now it was no longer taking damage. Izuku tried to take it back so he could heal it, but something was stopping him from doing so. Same with Dabi's original quirk. Strange, Izuku had no clue why this was happening. But he can't keep Dabi around forever. He has to go. They'll discuss this more when they see each other again. Izuku sighed and nodded his head. You're all good, Izuku said. Dabi seemed to be in pain, but he was loosening up a bit. He pushed himself off of the wall and stood up. All right, Snow Cone, Vampire, I'll see you two later. I know where you two live, so expect a surprise visit, Dabi said and waved off. Izuku and Himiko watched as he left. But Izuku couldn't help but get a gut feeling that something was wrong when he went to look into Dabi's quirk. So, this was the end of part 3 of this series. Stay tuned for next part of this series, and if you like this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Until next time.